Welcome back to the deep dive. We are diving into a stack of sources today that don't just rewrite history. They fundamentally redefine what we thought constituted the beginning of civilization itself. When most people hear oldest temple, they think of Göbekli Tepe.
And that's exactly where the deep dive mission begins and immediately expands. Göbekli Tepe, or GT as we'll probably call it, with its monumental T-pillars, it's certainly spectacular. But the relentless pace of archaeological discovery really shows that GT wasn't just some sudden burst of genius out of nowhere.
Right.
Our sources reveal this vast tapestry of interconnected, highly sophisticated ancient cultures across the Fertile Crescent in Anatolia. They were already laying the social, architectural, and ritual groundwork thousands of years beforehand.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our sources today, they span the timeline from the very end of the Ice Age right into the dawn of the Neolithic. We're tracing what we now understand was a gradual, highly advanced progression of human technical and social skills. So we're moving from the Epipaleolithic into the Pre-Pottery Neolithic, showing that the so-called Neolithic revolution, well, maybe it wasn't quite a revolution after all. More like an evolutionary climax.
Exactly. Our goal here is to connect the dots between settlements that aren't merely precursors, but are staggeringly older than GT. We're talking about permanent settlements dating back, get this, 23,000 years. Monumental community structures that actually dwarf some of the later sites in certain ways.
Wow.
And we'll analyze evidence of artistry so refined that it includes, believe it or not, 10,000-year-old human fingerprints preserved on ancient walls. We're going to fundamentally alter your concept, hopefully, of how long humans have been living settled, complex lives.
That is a staggering range of time.
Okay.
Let's jump straight into section 1 then. Explore this deep past what life truly looked like at the end of the last glacial maximum.
Right. To start, we have to go way back. We must look 23,000 years into the past, right to the peak intensity of the last glacial maximum. I mean, this is an era defined by brutal, cold, massive ice sheets covering large parts of the globe. That's the context for Ohalo II, a site that absolutely challenges the definition of settlement for its time.
Ohalo II thing. Yeah, this one's an astonishing anomaly, isn't it? It's located on the southwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee, northern Israel. And its age, 23,000 years, places it squarely in that time when, the textbooks teach us that human populations were highly mobile, seasonal hunter-gatherer groups, constantly chasing resources.
But Ohalo II was the exception that, well, it basically rewrote the rulebook. The sources confirm it was inhabited year-round. And not just for a short time, but it spanned numerous generations. We know this based on the sheer diversity and density of the waste material found, the storage pits.
Right, signs of continuous living.
Exactly. And the consistent renewal of structures over time, it suggests a real commitment to place that is just unique for that antiquity. This permanence, this stability, it makes it an exceptional rarity.
And the architectural claims are immense. It features the world's oldest known brush dwellings. Now, when we say brush dwellings, we're not just talking about some hastily assembled lean-tos, are we?
Not at all. These were 6 oval, semi-subterranean structures, about 9 to 15 feet in diameter. They were constructed by setting wooden posts into the ground in a very standardized, repeated oval pattern, then covered with brush or maybe animal hides. This level of structural planning, repeated across multiple generations, it really suggests a standardized building tradition was already in place.
Okay, that's pretty impressive in itself. But the second claim, that's the one that really destabilizes the traditional narrative of the Neolithic Revolution, isn't it?
It absolutely does. Ohalo II presents tangible evidence of the earliest known small-scale plant cultivation.
Wait. Small-scale cultivation. 11,000 years before the traditional advent of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent. How did they manage that?
Well, it wasn't full agriculture as we define it today with domesticated species and everything. It was more like intensive plant management. Archaeobotanists found nearly 100,000 specimens of wild cereals, things like wild barley and wheat, right on the floor surfaces of those dwellings.
Okay.
And critically, these seeds showed evidence of being intentionally harvested while still green, then processed, stored. This demonstrates really complex ecological knowledge and sustained intervention in the natural plant life cycle. It means the roots of sedentary life were being established through managing resources locally, not just pursuing them across the landscape.
So we've shifted the goalposts for permanent settlement way back, 23,000 years ago. Incredible. Now let's fast forward, about 8,500 years, still thousands of years before GT even exists. We arrive in the Natufian period and at Wadi Hammeh 27, or WH27. This is where we start seeing the transition to genuinely monumental architecture. Good.
exactly. WH27, it's in Pella, Jordan. It's a late Epipaleolithic site dating back 14,500 years ago. So geographically and chronologically, this places it roughly 3,000 years older than Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe. It belongs to the Natufian culture, which, as you said, is often stereotyped as maybe transitional or semi-nomadic.
And yet, the architecture discovered here just fundamentally contradicts that idea of a simple, mobile existence.
Yeah.
Right? This was clearly a base camp, maintained, revisited over generations. That indicates a deep investment in place in infrastructure.
Absolutely. And we really need to spend a moment on structure, too, because its scale is simply enormous for this period. It's the largest known Natufian structure ever discovered. It was oval, measuring 14 meters long. That's 46 feet.
46 feet.
Yeah. If you put that into context, that is a structure comparable in size to some of these ceremonial enclosures at GT, though admittedly a bit smaller than Karahan Tepe's huge enclosure AD. But building something of that scale required tremendous collective labor and, frankly, advanced engineering skills 14,500 years ago.
What's fascinating here is the sheer effort involved in just making it stable. The construction wasn't haphazard at all.
Yeah.
They used 3 concentric walls built using dry-built, undressed limestone. Typical enough, maybe.
But to stabilize this massive building on a hillside, which is tricky, they used mud mortar in the construction joints. That shows a real understanding of structural mechanics and, building for longevity.
Wow. Yeah.
Indeed. And the interior was sunken. The floor was carefully dug down about 30 centimeters, creating a concave depression. Similar, actually, to later structures we see at Ohalo II and even GT, maybe for temperature regulation or perhaps symbolic separation from the world outside.
And the centerpiece.
It wasn't just empty space. It contained at least 10 large boulders positioned as a central focal point.
Just the size of those boulders alone implies significant mobilization of labor, doesn't it? Moving those things. And it's theorized they supported a large central wooden post.
That's the thinking. And if that's true, it is highly reminiscent of the central T-pillars we see 3 millennia later in those Turkish sites. It suggests a deep, long-standing architectural tradition centered around some kind of symbolic core post.
And the artistry wasn't lagging behind either.
Not at all. The site contained decorative stones incised with these nested square motifs. There's speculation, which I find quite interesting, that these motifs were inspired by tortoise shells, giving us a little window into their worldview, right? Drawing symbolic connection between the natural world and their engineered space.
That makes sense.
And they also found small, quite detailed animal figurines made of stone and bone. It just proves that skilled artistry and refinement were well underway long before the traditional beginning of the Pre-Pottery Neolithic, the PPN.
So what really stands out to me is that 14,500 years ago, people had the engineering know-how, the social organization, and frankly the time to dedicate to building these 3-walled, mortar-stabilized, 46-foot-long structures, complete with internal art. This was sophisticated life, way earlier than we used to think.
Okay, so we've established these deep, deep roots in the Epipaleolithic. Now, to understand how Göbekli Tepe fits into the subsequent period, that crucial moment of massive architectural scaling, we need to establish the framework of the Pre-Pottery Neolithic, or PPN. Think of this as our essential decoder ring for the next stage.
Absolutely, because without this context, the shift we see between sites like WH27 and, say, Tell Abr 3, which we'll get to, doesn't make so much sense. The PPN framework, it was defined primarily by Kathleen Kenyon's groundbreaking work at Jericho, right?
That's right. The period generally spans from about 9,600 to 8,700 BC, give or take.
And the defining characteristic, the thing that gives the PPN its name, is the absence of pottery.
Yeah.
And also groundstone axes, which appear later in the Neolithic.
Exactly. And the PPN is usually broken into 2 main phases, PPN A and PPN B. They're demarcated primarily by changes in building shape and also tool technology.
Okay, so the PPN-A, that starts around 9,600 BC.
Right.
What characterizes that archaeologically?
Circular-based architecture is the big one. Think structures like the earliest layers of GT, those famous enclosures, or the roundhouses we'll discuss shortly at Tell Abr. Key artifacts include distinctive chipstone tools, cup-hole mortars, and notably, this practice of shallow burials located right beneath the floors of dwellings.
Okay, circular buildings, specific tools, underfloor burials. Got it. Then comes PPN-B.
Then comes PPNB. And this is when the architectural landscape fundamentally shifts. Rectangular structures become the common norm, replacing those circular plans. We also see the emergence of new types of stone projectile points, and crucially, this phase marks the moment when solid evidence for domesticated plants and animals truly starts appearing across the region in a widespread way.
And this framework is essential for understanding Göbekli Tepe's own biography, its story. We know GT spans both periods. The older Layer 3, that's the layer home to those enormous T-shaped pillars and the big circular enclosures, that's firmly rooted in the PPNA tradition.
But the site didn't just vanish after the PPNA. Layer 2, which is later, clearly shows the transition to the PPNB style. You get smaller buildings, rectangular ground plans, and the pillars themselves become much smaller, almost token versions compared to Layer 3.
And the tools confirm this timeline as well.
They do. Projectile points, they act almost like guiding fossils, like index markers in geology. GT contains clear PPNA types, specifically things called El Kiyam and Helwan points. But alongside those, it also has the later PPNB types, like Byblos and Nemric points.
Okay, so that mix of tool types confirms continuous, multi-generational use of the site. GT was active from the PPNA well into the mid-PPNB, before, as we know, it was intentionally abandoned and buried around 8000 BC. This places it perfectly at that transition point, moving from the hunter-gatherer-focused ritual centers towards a world increasingly dominated by established agricultural societies.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And having that clarity now allows us to look at a key PPNA hub in Syria, Tell Abr. Tell Abr is really a spectacular find. It's located strategically on the banks of the Euphrates in Syria, and it provides a really important geographical and chronological bridge between the great sites down in the Euphrates Valley and the monumental sites up north in Anatolia, like GT.
And the site was discovered almost by accident, wasn't it? Serendipitously.
Almost, yeah. In the winter of 2000, rising river levels began to erode a section of the ancient mound, the Tell. And this erosion revealed architecture that dated all the way back to the PPNA, around 11,000 years ago. If the water hadn't washed away that ground, we might still not know about this crucial piece of the puzzle.
Its location feels really significant. Tell Abr 3 is the closest Syrian PPNA site to Turkey, isn't it? Sitting kind of midway between other major Euphrates sites like Murebet and Cerfil Amar further south, and the Turkish monumental sites like GT to the north.
Exactly. It demonstrates that this architectural and artistic language of the PPNA was widely shared across this massive region. There was connection.
And even the domestic architecture here, the everyday houses, they were deeply impressive too.
Highly sophisticated construction, using stone, wood, and mud. They built circular dwellings, typical of the PPNA, usually about 3 meters or so in diameter.
Okay.
But the detail that really signals genuine long-term habitation planning is the substructure. Beneath the packed earthen floors of these dwellings, archaeologists found this filling. It consisted of earth and stones covered with small pebbles. This complex filling is believed to have been deliberately placed for insulation.
Insulation. 11,000 years ago.
Seems like it. They weren't just building walls, they were engineering environmental control into their homes even back then.
Incredible. But this is where the site truly shines, isn't it? In the southern village, which contains the oldest zone, this area is characterized by large, round, subterranean, and semi-subterranean communal buildings. Let's focus on the star, Building B2.
Right, Building B2 was clearly a communal structure, significant in both size and function. It measured 10 to 12 meters in diameter, so pretty big, and its floor was dramatically dug 1.5 meters down into the native soil, creating this sunken, almost pit-like interior space. That's a common feature in these early ritual structures, perhaps offering a sense of seclusion or maybe connection to the earth.
And around the perimeter of this deep pit, there was a low wall built and coated with mud. And here is where we find one of the most powerful connections to the people themselves. This mud coating was decorated with human fingerprints.
Yeah.
Dating back 10,000 to 11,000 years ago, you can literally see the physical touch of the ancient builders who smoothed that plaster. It's kind of mind-blowing.
It really is. And the interior design further elevates its status. Along the perimeter, there was a bench about 55 centimeter high, constructed with great care. And this bench was adorned with sculpted slabs of cut, polished stone. The sheer effort involved in mining, cutting, and then polishing stone slabs just for decoration highlights the massive investment in this building.
And what was depicted on those slabs? What did they carve?
They included detailed representations of powerful wild animals, gazelle, leopard, and the auroch, the wild bull, which we'll come back to. The leopards in particular were stylized, sometimes almost abstract, viewed from a kind of top-down perspective, with incised lines added to represent fur.
A top-down view of a leopard. That sounds familiar.
It should. That same top-down view of the leopard is seen on engraved stone tablets from nearby Jerf El Amar, and crucially on the pillars of Göbekli Tepe itself. It proves they shared not just building techniques, but a common symbolic visual language across a huge distance.
Wow, okay. So beyond the art, the structure also shows practical engineering integration.
Definitely. They embedded large wooden post holes about 25 to 30 centimeters in diameter at regular intervals between and sometimes in front of those stone slabs. This wasn't just decoration, this was a necessary supporting framework for a large, heavy, probably mud-coated roof structure. So the building had both this rich symbolic decoration and practical, long-lasting structure. They were doing both. All right, so we've established the deep roots, the PPN context, the shared symbolism. Now, let's shift our focus to the sites that are geographically and chronologically immediate precursors. These really confirm that monumental building was well established in Anatolia before the famous Layer 3 enclosures at Göbekli Tepe were even conceived.
Okay, kicking this off with Boncuklu Tarla, the beaded field. It's located in Mardin province, southeastern Turkey. Excavations began there in 2012, and the initial dating was a bit of a revelation, wasn't it?
It really was. Its structures are estimated to be around 12,000 years old. That places the foundation layers about 1,000 years older than the confirmed PPNA dates for GT's oldest reliably dated enclosure, Enclosure D. And some specific structures there have even been dated as far back as 13,000 years ago.
What I find most impressive about Boncuklu Tarla, reading the sources, is the sheer stability of the community. The evidence points towards uninterrupted settlement for approximately 5,000 years. From 13,000 BC down to 8,000 BC.
That's an enormous span of time.
It is, and it means they successfully navigated the really challenging period of the Younger Dryas climatic downturn, that sudden, sharp return to near-glacial conditions. A community that can maintain settlement through such harsh environmental shifts that's incredibly resilient.
Absolutely. And architecturally, we see direct parallels with the later sites like GT. Boncuklu Tarla features megalithic standing stones. It has special oval enclosures, clearly ceremonial or communal spaces constructed right alongside regular residential houses. It shows that structured integration of ritual and domestic life that really characterizes the PPN.
And this site offers a crucial contrast to Göbekli Tepe's eventual fate, doesn't it? There's a newly discovered large oval public building at Boncuklu Tarla that shows evidence of being rebuilt 3 times on the exact same spot, all around 12,000 years ago.
Yes, and this is a critical insight into how these ancient people managed their large structures. Experts believe that, much like what likely happened at GT's Enclosure C, these massive earth-sunk buildings experience progressive structural slumping. Earth creep on the hillside, pushing things out of alignment.
Makes sense for heavy sunken structures.
Right. But unlike the builders at GT, who eventually chose to ritually bury their slumped enclosures, the Boncuklu Tarla residents chose a different path. They meticulously dismantled the damaged version and rebuilt a new, functional one in its precise location, not once, but 3 times. This speaks to a continuous commitment to functional infrastructure over potentially millennia. They kept it going.
Very different approach. And the site is named the Beaded Field for a reason, I assume?
You assume correctly. Archaeologists found just vast quantities of beads, thousands upon thousands, suggesting sophisticated personal ornamentation was important. Alongside those, they found carved bone objects, weapons, tools, and other forms of portable art, all reinforcing the cultural complexity of this very early site.
Okay, so Boncuklu Tarla pushes things back significantly. Now, moving geographically closer to GT, we have Mendik Tepe. This one's in the Ayubiye area of Şanlıurfa, Turkey, and it's part of that expanding Taştepeler project, the network of sites around GT.
That's right. Mendik Tepe is another challenger to the GT first idea. It also dates to the early Neolithic, potentially predating GT, maybe around 12,000 years ago as well. It's important because it contributes more evidence to the idea that the shift from nomadic life to permanent settlement wasn't just one event at one place. It likely occurred at multiple diverse locations, maybe somewhat simultaneously.
But there's a vital architectural difference here, isn't there? One that suggests maybe some ideological variance.
Yes, exactly. While Mendik Tepe's structures do include pillars, the iconic, massive T-shaped pillars that are so characteristic of Göbekli Tepe are explicitly absent. They're not there. This suggests that the T-pillar motif, which seems to embody the intense spiritual focus of GT, wasn't universal across all these early Neolithic settlements. It implies maybe different ritual practices or perhaps different social hierarchies were in play just down the road.
Interesting. And another potential contrast involves how they got their food. subsistence.
Potentially, yes. While the earliest phases of GT are notably devoid of evidence for domesticated plants or animals, it seems purely hunter-gatherer based. Initially, Mendik Tepe is currently under investigation for signs of early agricultural practices. Now, this is still being researched, but if confirmed, it would suggest that people were experimenting with agriculture alongside complex ritual construction at the same time, right in the same neighborhood as GT.
That would be a significant finding. Okay, and finally in this section we have to revisit Nevali Cori. While it's slightly later than Boncuklu Tarla, maybe more 9th millennium BCE, it's often cited as the known Proto-Göbekli Tepe, right? Suggesting direct continuity.
Yes, its importance lies in demonstrating clear ideological and cultural continuity, leading directly into the practices we see fully expressed at GT. Nevali Cori represents a bit of a shift in architectural style, though. It's known for meticulously constructed rectangular buildings. This is a key shift from the earlier circular PPNA tradition.
Right, rectangular made from precisely cut limestone, serving as both dwellings and ceremonial spaces.
Exactly. And they included internal stone pillars, not T-shaped, but still pillars, and some of the earliest known terrazzo floors. These are polished, aggregate surfaces. It showcases highly advanced construction capabilities for the time.
And artistically, it's a milestone too.
Definitely. It features some of the earliest known, really clear depictions of the human form in both statues and reliefs, including the famous limestone head statue. This profoundly challenges older assumptions about Neolithic artistic capabilities. They weren't just carving abstract symbols or animals, they were engaging in complex human representation.
And unlike the early hunter-gatherer phase of GT, Nevali Cori clearly shows cultivation of wheat and barley.
Yeah, so they were balancing that transition towards farming with complex belief systems, including ritualistic practices and ancestor veneration, often using skull fragments recovered beneath the floors, similar to other PPN seats.
Precisely. It links the developing agriculture with the ongoing complex ritual life. Okay, so if we synthesize the findings from these geographically distant sites stretching from Jordan up through Syria into Turkey, one symbolic element emerges as a really consistent thread. It connects them across thousands of years. The overwhelming ritual importance of the aurochs, the massive wild bull.
The aurochs. Yeah, it seems to have held the absolute highest ritual significance across the entire PPN cultural sphere, didn't it? We saw this clearly at Tell Abr 3. And the use wasn't just casual depiction, it was deeply embedded into the very foundation and structure of the buildings.
Yes, absolutely. At Tell Abr 3, the symbol of the bull appeared everywhere. A bucranium, that's a sculpted bull head, was found adorned on a stone slab. But the real depth of the ritual is seen in the structural deposits. For example, the actual skull of an aurochs was found intentionally placed inside the bench of that communal building B2.
Inside the bench.
Hidden away.
Directly behind one of those decorated gazelle slabs, yeah. And it wasn't just skulls. Aurochs' ankle bones were discovered meticulously placed at the bottom of the wooden post holes that held up the roof.
Why? Why hide a massive animal skull on the bench or put ankle bones under posts? What's the thinking there? Well, archaeologists interpret these deposits as foundation offerings, essentially, intended to offer symbolic protection to the structure, perhaps transferring the animal's immense power or perceived strength into the building's stability or spiritual integrity. It suggests that maybe every time they raised a central post, it was consecrated with this powerful ritual act involving the aurochs.
And this symbolism wasn't isolated to Tell Abr 3. The aurochs bull motif was famously and widely used on the T-pillars of GT, often stylized, looking quite aggressive.
Exactly. And likewise, aurochs skulls are thought to have been suspended on interior walls at Jurfil Amar, and potentially in other communal buildings like Building M3 at Tell Abr 3 as well. It was clearly a shared, powerful belief system surrounding the wild bull across the region.
Let's delve into another communal structure at Tell Abr 3 then. Building M1. What did they find there?
Right, M1. It was another large, circular, sunken structure, about 7.9 meters in diameter. It showed clear evidence of fire damage at some point in its history. Inside, archaeologists found a small podium which rested on an L-shaped clay bench.
And this podium was also dedicated to the aurochs.
It seems so. It held the skulls and bones of the animal. Some were even accompanied by flint arrowheads still embedded in them or placed nearby. And the whole deposit was framed by pebbles, then carefully covered with a mass of clay. It suggests a dedicated space specifically for the ritualistic veneration and perhaps display related to the hunt, or the symbolic power of the animal.
This raises a fascinating question then about the purpose of these huge communal structures. Were they purely temples or something else?
That's a great question, and the answer seems to change over time. In the early PPNA, looking at sites like GT, Tell Abr 3, and Muribet, the sources suggest these large oval communal buildings were sometimes subdivided internally. This hints they might have been multifunctional. Used for rituals, yes, but maybe also for social gatherings, communal food processing, perhaps even some storage.
Okay, so a mix of sacred and maybe more practical functions early on.
Possibly. But the function seems to have narrowed over time, particularly in the Euphrates zone. By the end of the PPNA, these communal buildings become increasingly enriched with decoration. They lose those internal subdivisions entirely, and importantly, they lack any clear evidence of storage pits or domestic waste. The archaeological consensus suggests they were likely transitioning into spaces used solely for specialized rites and rituals, a clearer separation, maybe, between the sacred and the mundane activities of the village.
Interesting evolution. And we cannot overlook the incredible craftsmanship displayed in the portable art recovered, especially Tell Abr 3.
Yeah.
This wasn't primitive stuff.
Not at all. This wasn't crude work. We see a real mastery of difficult materials.
Like that zoomorphic chlorite vase or bowl shaped like a bowl or aurochs. Chlorite's not easy to work with, is it?
No, it's a relatively soft stone, but carving a recognizable detailed animal shape from it and polishing it shows a sophisticated artistic tradition and significant effort.
And there was also that decorated chlorite bowl showing a narrative scene. A headless, naked man hunting.
Yes, carrying a spear and aiming it at a gazelle. It likely depicts some kind of mythological event or perhaps a ritualistic hunt, telling a story in stone. And then there's the famous human stone, a cylindrical piece of masonry, only about 30 centimeters tall, sculpted with these long, stylized arms and small hands.
What could that represent?
Hard to say for sure. Possibly an early depiction of an ancestor figure, or maybe a deity. But this combination, the fixed monumental art on the slabs, the structure-embedded ritual deposits like the skulls, and these finely crafted, portable objects, it just proves that their intellectual and symbolic life was every bit as complex as their architecture.
Okay, so the existence of Ohalo II at 23,000 years ago, WH27 at 14,500, Boncuklu Tarla potentially at 13,000. It all makes establishing an accurate timeline for Göbekli Tepe itself even more crucial, doesn't it?
Okay.
But the sources reveal that dating GT accurately is, well, notoriously difficult.
It really is. The dating problem at GT is quite unique because of how those big layer third enclosures were decommissioned. They weren't simply abandoned to collapse over time. They were ritually cleaned out. The internal fittings seemed to have been dismantled, and then they were rapidly backfilled with tons and tons of sediment. And this sediment contained objects of importance, things like broken tools, animal bones, bits of sculpture, and other cultural debris from the surrounding area.
Okay, here's where we need to maybe stop and clarify some archaeological jargon for you listening. This fast backfilling process creates a massive risk. It's called inverse stratigraphy.
Right. Think of it this way. Normally, stratigraphy means the oldest things are found on the bottom layers, and the newest things are on the top layers. Makes sense. But if you quickly fill a deep pit, like one of these enclosures, you might accidentally toss in a bag of really old ancient tools, maybe collected from the surrounding hillside from centuries before, right on top of, say, a fresher piece of wood that fell in just when the roof was being dismantled.
So the older object ends up physically higher in the fill than the younger object.
Exactly. It reverses the expected timeline within the fill layers. And because the backfill at GT seems to have happened relatively quickly, taking samples from those fill layers can produce wildly confusing radiocarbon dates. You don't always know if you're dating the fill event or the material in the fill, which could be much older or younger than the structure itself.
And this complexity, this inverse stratigraphy risk, it really derailed some early dating attempts, didn't it? I read that early researchers tried to date the architecture directly using something called pedogenic carbonates, a layer on the limestone.
Yeah, the intention was good. Pedogenic carbonates are thin calcium carbonate layers that form on limestone surfaces once they're buried in soil. The idea was to date the formation of that layer. But the methodology, unfortunately, failed in this context. The dates derived from those carbonates were consistently too young. They sometimes pushed the massive layer-through enclosures deep into the 9th millennium BCE, making them seem much younger than they actually were.
Why did that happen?
Because the carbonate layers only started forming after the structure was already buried, so they were dating the burial process, or sometime after the burial, not the moment of construction or use. They just couldn't capture the true antiquity of those T-pillars.
So how did researchers finally solve this investigative puzzle? How did they confirm the GT timeline more reliably?
They had to get smarter. They focused on finding organic material that was definitively linked to the moment of construction or use, not just loose in the fill. The better sources turned out to be things like tiny organic traces found embedded within the wall plaster itself, or charcoal samples taken from very careful, deep soundings excavated right down near the bedrock floor of the enclosures.
Okay, so material trapped in the plaster when it was wet, or from the very first fires on the floor.
Exactly. For instance, a sample taken directly from the wall plaster of enclosure D, which is basically loam containing small bits of organic material mixed in, yielded a far more reliable date.
And that result was the key.
That result was definitely key. 9745-9314 calibrated BC. That date range firmly places the construction of enclosure D, one of the largest and seemingly oldest enclosures, squarely within the definitive early PPNA period. It confirmed the massive scale of construction really was happening back then, in the 10th millennium BC.
And this crucial confirmation was backed up by other finds.
Yes, it was further supported by new, careful, deep soundings excavated near the actual bedrock floor of enclosure D. Charcoal samples recovered from those lowest levels clustered consistently between 9664 to 9311 calibrated BC. This confirmed that major construction activities were definitely underway during the mid-10th millennium BC.
Okay, so the dating is solid now for that PPNA phase.
It is. This meticulous dating allows us to conclude that the Layer 3 enclosures weren't all built at the exact same time. Enclosure D seems to provide the earliest documented sequence of construction, use, and eventual burial. And ultimately, the entire site seems to have been abandoned after the middle PPNB, around 8000 BC, which fits the broader picture. And once that timeline for GT is rigorously confirmed, the significance of sites like Boncuklu Tarla, 1,000 years older, WH27, 3,000 years older, and Ohalo II, over 11,000 years older, becomes absolutely impossible to ignore. They prove the PPNA wasn't the beginning of architectural sophistication, but rather a final, perhaps grand-scale expression of knowledge and social organization that had been evolving for millennia beforehand. #tag outro.
Wow, what a journey through time that was. We started with Göbekli Tepe as the kind of undisputed oldest temple, the starting point. And we've ended up constructing a timeline for the dawn of civilization, or at least complex, settled life, that stretches back, well, 23,000 years to Ohalo II.
Yeah.
This story is clearly not a single magical appearance of genius in Anatolia around 9600 BC.
No, not at all. It's a vast, complex, and deeply interconnected evolution over a huge span of time. We traced sophisticated permanent settlement and early plant management all the way back to Ohalo II at 23,000 years ago. We saw the true beginnings of monumental engineering with that triple-walled 46-foot Natufian structure too at WH27 14,500 years ago. And we found communities like Boncuklu Tarla, potentially a millennium older than GT's main phase, showing continuous settlement and impressive structural rebuilding right through massive climatic shifts like the Younger Dryas.
The sheer volume of sophisticated architecture, the mastery of cutting and polishing stone, the complex ritual practices, like that systematic symbolic use of the aurochs, skull and bone deposits for maybe protective consecration across geographically distant sites, it just demonstrates that the technical skills, the social organization, the intelligence necessary for what we call civilization were fully developed long before the onset of the traditional Neolithic era. The foundation was already well and truly laid.
Absolutely. The PPN sites, including GT, they seem to have refined and perhaps scaled up the social and technological knowledge inherited from their Epipaleolithic predecessors. It really looks more like a cultural climax based on millennia of development rather than a singular starting point out of the blue.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, connecting these two worlds, the precursors and GT itself. We know the people of Göbekli Tepe took great, almost ritualistic care to clean, dismantle, and then intentionally backfill and bury their monumental structures. This wasn't just abandonment. It seems like an act of reverence, maybe preservation.
Right. However, we also have solid evidence now of continuous remodeling and rebuilding at precursor sites like Boncuklu Tarla and maybe WH27 whenever they experience structural issues like slumping. They fixed the old or they built new right in the same spot, prioritizing functional longevity, keeping the structure in use.
So here's the question. Why did the builders of GT, who clearly could rebuild as evidenced by those 3 rebuilding cycles at Boncuklu Tarla, why did they instead choose to permanently bury their largest, most impressive structures?
Does the intentional burial of the monumental T-pillar enclosures at GT reveal a deeper, maybe time-specific ritual imperative? A desire to perhaps intentionally freeze that moment in history or consecrate the memory of the site in a permanent way that we still don't fully understand?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it?
pitting structural pragmatism, just fixing it against some kind of powerful ritual necessity that demanded burial, it fundamentally shapes how we view their relationship with their own history and time itself.
Definitely food for thought on your next deep dive.